Welcome to Year 2 of the Funding Love podcast. I'm Mallory Elrod.
And I'm Caitlin Duckworth. We are two adoptive moms that seek to love, support, and elevate all corners of the adoption triad, including adoptive families, adoptees, and birth parents.
We do that through honest conversation with both expert and everyday voices about all things adoption and more, all while running our nonprofit, Funding Love.
We create post-adoption experiences that strengthen bonds, build community, and restore people.
We are Funding Love,
the podcast. Welcome to episode 89 of the Funding Love podcast. I'm Kate, one of your co-hosts, and I am so glad you tuned in for this one, because on today's show, we have our sweet friend, Ashley Workman. Ashley is a wife to her sweet husband, Jimbo, a mom to her beautiful daughter, Sunny, who she welcomed home via adoption, and she's a travel agent. We are so grateful for Ashley's vulnerability on this episode. She shares with us the ups and the downs of their adoption process and all of the feelings that go along with that. It is a great episode, and I know you will all find hope and encouragement in what Ashley has to share. Let's take a listen. Record now, yes.
All right, awesome. Well, hi, Ashley. We are so excited to have you on this episode of the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Yes. Excited to be here.
Oh, we're so excited to have you. And just for those, who don't know Ashley, she is a coworker of our husband's. She works for Travelmation along with my husband, Adam, and Mal's husband, Tim. So we've known her for a long time. And I feel like this episode with you is a long time coming because you've been on our list for a while to have on the podcast. So I'm excited that we finally made it happen.
Yeah, I'm excited too. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, me too. I know that's one thing that initially connected us. Caitlin, I don't know if you know this, but my cousin actually was the first to introduce the two of us because she lives in Jacksonville near my cousin. And she was like, oh, she's an adoptive mom too, like newly adopted mom. And so that's how we got connected, was through adoption. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your story and how, you are connected to this adoption community?
Yeah. So I get to be in the community because I'm an adoptive mom. My daughter is adopted. She's 7.5. So yeah.
Yeah, so you are an adoptive mom, just like Mel and I, and I feel like, same Ashley, that's the first place where you and I connected, because when my husband introduced me to you, we weren't adoptive parents yet, but we were looking into jumping into that journey, and he's like, here's Ashley, she's an adoptive mom, they just adopted Sunny,
Yeah.
So that was the first connecting point for us too, so I feel like that's how our friendship was built as well.
Yeah.
So I love that, and I love having that community with you, so that's
Me
great.
too.
So let's talk about your family's journey to adoption. Because this episode we're calling an adoption story, from an adoptive mom's perspective. So we just I feel like the power in story is so powerful.
Right.
Because I think it's relatable. So those who want to jump in the process are in the process. I feel like just hearing more stories and different perspectives is a comforting thing. So let's talk about your family's journey. So what led you to adoption? Is that something you always wanted to do? Was that on your heart? How did it become a part of your story?
So when my husband and I were dating, I remember we were driving around in his big lifted truck, and I said, just so you know, I want to adopt kids one day. And he said, oh, great, because I do too. And so I was like, okay, awesome. Okay. So, and when we got married, we'd been married for about 3 years, and we decided it was a good time to try to start building our family. And unfortunately, we found out within, a couple years that we were one of those couples that it just wasn't going to happen like that. And that biological kids, we were struggling with infertility, and we were going down that road, and we realized that we were going to have to decide if we wanted to become parents. Were we going to go down the road of fertility treatments and doctors and things like that? Or did we want to go ahead and go down the road of adoption because we knew we already, that at some point in our family story, adoption was going to be there. So we both prayed about it, and we talked about it, and we said, you know what, fertility treatments are just that's not what our journey is going to look like. We're just going to go ahead and go straight to pursuing adoption. And so that's what we did. And so, yeah, that's how we ended up in the adoption community.
I do know that a lot of our listeners have been in the same boat as you as far as infertility. We've got, when we had our friend Mackenzie on talking about her story of infertility, we've had a lot of listeners and a lot of feedback and a lot of people who really found comfort in that episode. So, talk about that if you don't mind, just a little bit about that journey and that realization that was kind of going to be part of your story.
Yeah. So, oh my gosh, I think a lot of people feel like they can't talk about it. When I realized that was what was happening to us, that my body didn't work like it was supposed to work, and that we were just not getting pregnant. We weren't going to get pregnant. I felt like I didn't have anybody to talk to about that, because everyone in my family always got pregnant very easily. My friends got pregnant very easily. And then I felt like there wasn't really an outlet of people to talk to about that. Like, you don't post about it on your social media. Like, who do I talk to about this? And somehow, I don't remember how this happened, but somehow someone connected me with an infertility like Bible study group here locally. Oh my gosh. And that was just life for me, because it wasn't a bunch of women sitting around talking about how terrible the hand we had been dealt was. It was a bunch of women sitting around talking about how good God still was, even if this wasn't exactly how we thought our lives would go, and we thought our marriages would go, and we thought our, journey to parenthood would go. And so being connected with other women that were able to really talk about what it felt like to be one of the women who your body doesn't work how it's supposed to work. And I've read books about it, and I think for those who haven't experienced it, and I'm not one who I feel like you need to always walk on eggshells around other people's feelings. However, I do think that I learned a lot about being sensitive because of this journey, because there were times that I would be like in the grocery store and saw a pregnant person. I literally had to leave the grocery store because it was just so painful to realize there is nothing I can do. This is just not happening for me. And then also trying to put together with that God is still good and that he still has a plan, and parenthood and wanting to be a parent is a good thing and a God thing. And so trying to put all that together, but realizing that, with infertility, it is a mourning that happens every single month. It just, you're mourning somebody that's just never going to be, instead of somebody that already was. And sometimes you're mourning somebody that already was because, some women have recurrent miscarriages and that's their journey of infertility. But mostly you're mourning someone that's just never going to be. And that's tough. I remember having a conversation with my husband one time, and he's pretty quiet. He's a pretty quiet guy, very supportive, but most of the time it was just a lot of hugs and a lot of, just letting me cry and vent. But I remember one time he said, when he realized that we probably weren't going to have any biological kids, that he was devastated. And that was devastating to me, because I always kind of felt like I cared more than he did.
Yeah.
But just, it's a lot for a family, a couple, to realize that is what they've been dealt and that is their journey, is that they're not going to see the kid that looks like dad's, has dad's nose and has mom's eyes. That's just not going to happen for them. So yeah.
And I like that you brought up his grief too, because we do talk a lot about, of course, the women, because it's her body that she so badly wants to carry, and she's the one who's usually wants to get pregnant. And I like that you brought up that your husband was grieving too. Even though he's quiet and he's a man and tries not to show all that he does have those feelings of devastation and grief as well. And you're not, when you were saying you're grieving somebody that, is never going to be, you're also grieving the plans that you wish for yourself, down the road, all of the things that you imagined your family would be, that you've already pictured because it's what you're longing for. So you're grieving that. So that's not, it's not something that's not easy. It's not just saying, oh, I'm not going to be pregnant. Okay. It's all of that is just it's so heavy, and it goes along with that. So thank you for sharing that.
And I
Yeah.
think it goes back to as well of we say, adoption is love, adoption is hard, adoption is beautiful, adoption is loss. And I think
Mhm.
a lot of time the adoptive family gets pushed out of that side. Adoption is not
Mhm.
loss for you. You gained a baby. But
Right.
it is because we lose getting to carry the child. We lose
Mhm.
getting to, if you've struggled with infertility, getting to ever have
Yeah.
a biological child. Like there is loss on all sides. And
Mhm.
I don't think we should compare our losses to each other's and try to
Mm-mm.
say, well, mine is greater and yours isn't,
Yeah.
because that's just pushing the corners farther apart instead of bringing us together of like, we've all lost something here.
Mhm.
Yeah, for sure. That's a
No,
great point.
that's good.
So
So
me
is
and Caitlin, when we talked to our husbands about adoption, they're like, oh yeah, cool, want to do that. And then when it
Yeah.
came time, they were like, wait. So when it came time to okay, we're not going to conceive a child, let's maybe
Mhm.
try for adoption. What was your husband's reaction to that? I want to know.
Yeah, he was very similar to your husband's. He was like, well, I mean, yeah, something that we can talk about. And I remember, again, another car conversation. I think I had just turned 31. And it was one of those times where I literally just threw a fit.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm 31. We can't keep just thinking about it. If it's gonna be something we pursue, we have to do it. I know it's gonna be hard. I know we're gonna have to be very vulnerable, and that's something we've not had to do before. I know it's gonna cost a lot of money that we don't have. I know that we have actually no idea what this journey is gonna look like for us, but we have to, if we're gonna do it, we have to do it, and we have to do it right now. And he said,
Yeah.
okay.
You got to take that first step. You do. You have to just
Yeah.
take step one and do whatever step
Right.
one is. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, there's something about that where when it's time to hit the go button, the guy's like, well, good thought.
Yeah.
Maybe you want like 6 months. Let's reevaluate that in 6 months or something.
Right.
It's kind of like
Yeah.
that. That's so funny.
Yes.
So did y'all use an agency, an attorney, a consultant? What was your route that you guys went?
Yeah. So, we initially were hoping to do, I don't remember like the official term, but like an independent match where we were like, hey, we'll just tell social media that we want to adopt and see if we can find someone who might be wanting to place. And then that way we can kind of cut out the cost of an agency, because an agency can be very costly. That didn't happen, but through us putting ourselves out there on social media, we did find a small agency that had just started. And so we ended up signing with that agency in February of 2015. So we sat down, we signed with them, we paid the deposit or whatever it was at the time. We got matched with an expectant mother in June of 2015. And then at that time, our agency director, there were kind of some red flags coming up. Like we were supposed to have a birth mother advocate, like a counselor who was helping our birth mom. And then we were supposed to have sort of like an advocate for us as well. And it kept being like, well, we'll email you, we'll get you their phone number, but it just was not happening. What did happen was that she connected us, like gave us each other's phone number, and I became her advocate. And that's, there was no one else. It was just me and birth mom. And I was counseling her, which is so ridiculous. I know
Yeah, that's
it
hard.
makes
Yeah.
it makes no sense for, the person that you were supposed to be potentially placing your baby with, to be counseling you through placing your baby.
Right.
Yes.
So, yeah. So, we were matched for 5 months. So it was very early. And again, red flags coming up, things that were inconsistencies with the stories of the birth mom and the story of our agency director. Why were things not happening? In November of 2015, we started the drive up to Michigan to await the baby's arrival. So, we stopped in North Carolina, kind of halfway, visited with some friends there. And while we were there, I got a call from the agency director that our birth mom had already delivered and signed the birth certificate, which pretty much meant that baby's been named and the baby's not going to be coming home with you. And so it was kind of like a really chaotic 24 hours. But in that 24 hours, we realized that that adoption was not going to go through like we thought. And that was, speaking of devastating, that was devastating for me. So I lost my dad as a teenager in a really traumatic way. Going through infertility, a couple of miscarriages, tough stuff along the way, but that was really the toughest thing that I've ever gone through. Having been matched for 5 months and, hoping and baby shower and baby's room is ready and, halfway there. And then, she's going to be, keeping the baby. So obviously, there's so many emotions that come with that because it is 100% her right to keep her baby. It's always been her baby. It was never my baby.
Right.
But in the meantime, in this situation, there was also what was true and what wasn't true. Was she really planning on placing with us? And as we realized that those red flags were glaring more than we thought, in the time that passed or the time after the adoption failed, we found out that our agency, I'm gonna use quote marks,
sure,
was not actually a certified agency in the state of Florida.
Wow.
And the director of the agency is now in prison. She's serving a 10-year. Yeah.
Oh my word.
She's serving a 10-year prison sentence for wire fraud, and the biggest adoption fraud scheme in United States history.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That is insane.
Wow.
So it felt like a huge lie. Like you were taking on this big journey and your heart was in it. You were investing in this woman. You had plans for the future, for your family, for this child. Oh my gosh, Ashley, that is, I mean, I can empathize with you in the whole investing with the mom and feeling like you're her support. That was kind of our journey in the beginning of this year when we had that interrupted adoption, I guess you could call it, where you felt like, where's her support? I shouldn't be it. And then, but then it draws you near to her because then you care more. And it's just this whole twisted thing that shouldn't be. It's like a conflict of interest.
For sure.
And then to have that taken away, all that you're investing in, it feels like you hate to compare it because, and this is why adoption is so complex, because in any other adoption, the birth mom is placing her child with you. So she's experiencing that loss. And then it feels like when the adoption fails, you're experiencing that loss. And I know they're not the same. They're not the same. And I'm not trying to compare, but you do get a taste of that grief. And it's heavy. So it honestly gave me, after I went through that, a lot of perspective for my daughter Libby's birth mom of like, this is heavy. Like this is, and I'm not even, I'm just a percentage of that, but I'm so sorry that you went through that. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And that it was a scandal.
The mistrust of, an agency. So like, how do you move forward with that when you are skeptical, not only of like going into something that you could be heartbroken again, that's hard, but also like, who can I trust? Like, I really thought that this was a trustworthy agency. So how did you move forward from that?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, it was crazy. So what was really amazing during this time was that my church actually had a ministry for adoptive families. I know, which is, I found out at the time, it was kind of unheard of, and most churches don't have that kind of ministry. So during that time, I was able to really dive into the ministry, and what it was a support system for families who had already adopted, who were hoping to adopt, or who were in the process. And each month there would be some sort of different entity of adoption that would come in and talk to us. And one of the months right after our adoption didn't go through, there was a director of a local agency who came to speak, and I just kind of pulled her aside and asked her a million questions after that. And she told me all the I kind of brought up the red flags, and she's like, you did the things that you saw that you were worried about. You were right to be worried about during that time.
Yeah.
These are the things they did that were wrong, and that you should, if an agency wants to do this, run away. The fact that we were matched so early, the fact that she didn't have any sort of advocate for herself, things like that other agencies were also doing. But so she just kind of gave me some guardrails, I think, that made me feel comfortable moving forward with another agency, what I would be looking for. But so do you want me to go ahead and tell you how we did end up adopting since that one didn't work out?
Yeah.
Keep going.
So, so during that time, after it didn't go through, I really had made adoption kind of like an idol, or I think maybe becoming a parent became an idol. I just couldn't let it go. So I was emailing every attorney, every agency I had ever, contacted in the 2 years that had led up to that point. And during that season, I think it was like February of 2016, I just knew that I needed to take a break. So I really just took some time with the Lord, and I said, okay, I have to give this to you. And I know I've said that a million times before, but I really have to hand it over this time, and I'm not picking it back up, because if I have this amazing husband, and if it's your plan for us to just be the two of us, I'm going to be okay with that. And if it's your plan for us to have a million babies, I'm going to be okay with that. But right now, I just have to be okay with just peace right now, right here. So I'm handing it over, and I'm not picking it back up until Lent is over. It was like during Lent, so I'm like, I'm fasting from anything having to do with becoming a parent. I'm just taking a break. And maybe 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from a lawyer that I had reached out to like 2 years before that, when we first started the process.
Oh, wow.
And she's like, I'm going down the line of names of people who've reached out to me, but I have a baby who's already born in the hospital, and she's sick, and they don't know exactly what she's struggling with, but they know she needs a mom and dad. And I was like, oh, and she's like, oh, and by the way, papers have already been signed. But we just need a decision pretty quickly. And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay. So of course I texted Jimbo, and then she sent me a picture.
Aww.
And as soon as I saw the picture, how can you say no to, and she was just so beautiful. Like, she was just such a beautiful baby. And all the tubes and cords didn't intimidate me. I just knew she was going to be fine. So Jimbo and I said yes. And, yep. And so we went to the hospital the next day, which is in Gainesville, which is about an hour and a half from us. So it's about an hour and a half drive. So, when we showed up, and I know I've heard stories that some adoptive families aren't treated so well in the hospital. But when we showed up, they were just so thankful that we were there. I'll never forget when we went to the registration, the check-in, and I said, we're here to see, such and such baby. And they said, oh, are you mom and dad? And I was like, I think we are.
Yeah.
Yes. I know. It was so sweet. And then from that moment on, she just kept improving as soon as we met her and could touch her. And the second night we were there was the first time that she opened her eyes, but she opened her eyes. She was crying, and I started to sing to her and, try to soothe her. My mom was with me, and she opened her eyes and looked at me like she had just always known me. Like, she just looked right at it, and she stopped crying. And my mom was like, oh my gosh, it's like she knows you. The nurses were crying. It was beautiful. It was just beautiful.
Yeah.
So,
my gosh. Look at that. Look at God. When you're just like,
I
listen,
know.
I can't do it. I need you. And
I
he's
know.
like, I've got it all along. Don't you worry. That is so awesome. And your daughter is just hilarious. I mean,
She is. She's
I've only, I think,
ridiculous.
personally met her maybe one time, but
Yeah.
the videos and the things that you post are just too
Mhm.
much. I mean, it's
Yeah,
like
she's too much.
like an old
She's
soul, right?
not
She's got-
lacking personality.
no,
She is
that's
not. She is not. That is
that's a good
correct.
way to put it. That is a good way to
Yeah.
put it.
Yeah.
So, people listening can grasp this, but the adoption process is hard. It is. There's no
Mhm.
way around it. It is hard. It's emotionally taxing because there's
Mhm.
so many feelings, because there's so many different people involved with different feelings. So it's just not straightforward, and it never will be, just because of that. But
Right.
and I could go on about this for a long time. I really could. I have a lot of feelings
Mhm.
about all of that. But that being said, because it's so hard, you touched on this a little bit, but I know your faith is strong, and that is what you leaned on. But how did you get through that? Give our listeners an idea, like just, I guess, some tips, maybe how you got through it, what helped you through the process. How did you find hope when you felt like there was no hope, and just
Right.
manage all of that?
Oh my gosh, it was so hard. But like I was saying before, being able to have the adoption ministry at our church was just incredible. So to be walking through the process with other people in our church circle who are also walking through the process at the same time was just priceless. So being able to really be in a group of believers who were walking through the same process and knowing that the same things were true for all of us, even if our journeys were looking very different.
Right.
So I just had to keep telling myself that God is good. He has a plan.
Mm-hmm.
God is good. He has a plan. And so, and for me, and I don't know, I know some people feel like that God has really told them, like, you're going to be a parent through adoption. For me, I really had to come to the place where I knew that if this didn't go through and we didn't become parents, that I had to be okay with that. Not that I felt like there was a point that I was going to necessarily give up, but I just had to get to the point where I had peace about
Whatever it would have been. Yeah.
whatever it would have been.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that God was still good, and he was still on the throne, and he was still in control. Even if, because for me, the parts that I didn't share so far was that our journey from the beginning to the end, we had talked to, counseled, been connected with 5 other women before we were matched officially. So like one young girl was like a neighbor of somebody, and she asked us to dinner and wanted us to meet her and asked me to feel her belly. And then she ended up, choosing somebody else. But that was like 5 different. One of them was a woman who was a friend of a friend from church who lived in a different state. But I had been kind of talking with her, and she ended up having like an abortion at like 20 weeks. So it was just like closed door, closed door, closed door, closed door, closed door after, years of infertility, after one miscarriage. And so for me, it had come to the point, like I said, that year during Lent, where I was like, okay, Lord, something has to give, and I have to remind myself of the true things, the only things that I know are true, which are, you are good, you are in control, you have a plan, and I just have to like let the rest go, because there's been too many no's, and I can't handle that anymore. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
I don't know if I really answered the
the
question,
truth.
but
I mean, you reached your human capacity to handle all of that. And so, for you as a believer, that is giving it to God, and and also finding community with other people in that same thing is so huge. And realizing that you certainly cannot do that all on your own. You cannot carry that all on your own, because you will try to, like, I hate this word kind of, but manifest it. You try to do all of the things that it takes. I'm going to email everybody. I'm going to do all of this, have all the conversations, connect all the people. And so you try so hard to make it happen. And we all know that, God is in control the whole time. And so he's like, down, like, come on, chill out. And, and you just hit your wall that you can really handle it.
And Tim and I have said that throughout our marriage too, with different things, not just adoption, with buying homes or, making big life choices. It's like we can force ourselves through any door.
Right.
We can.
Yeah.
But once we get to that other side, what's going to go wrong because it wasn't open to us and we forced our way in.
Right.
So I think that even in the adoption world, it's like that too. I feel like there are probably adoptive families out there that are like really struggling because they forced their way in because no, this is what I want. And this is, you know, and for all corners of the triad. And so, you know, I think that learning to trust what the Lord has for you is the biggest thing that we can do. And I think your story alone is just such a testimony to that.
Yeah. And the coolest part of the story is that when we were in the process, and like I said, when Jimbo finally said yes, and we realized, okay, we're gonna have to figure out where a good amount of money is gonna come from. Mal, I remember that you guys did fundraising things when you were in the process as well.
Yes.
And so we did our first big fundraiser, which was going to be a garage sale. So we just basically asked everyone in our community, and we're really blessed to have a huge network of people that we love and that love us from just being involved in different churches and in different ministries. And so when we announced to the world that we were adopting, but we were going to be having a garage sale, all we needed people to do was just give us the stuff that they were going to be giving to like Goodwill or whatever. We would come pick it up, we would store it. And then when we had the garage sale, come, you know, and shop. So we ended up collecting items for like 6 weeks. And we ended up filling up my mom's 2-car garage. And then we needed also an additional storage unit, which got completely filled. And then people just from the community were like, well, we want to donate such and such. Why don't you have a raffle at the garage sale? And we're like, sure. And then our favorite taco place here locally, they were like, how about we have the taco truck come and we'll, you know, serve tacos at the garage sale? And we're like, yeah, that sounds great. Yes. They said, yes, this sounds great. So when it came time to do the garage sale, it was literally like the loaves and the fish. The stuff filled up an entire football field. It was like people were coming by and they're like, is this a flea market?
You're like,
and I was like, well, yeah, it sure looks like it. We raised $10,000 that day.
That is insane.
Wow.
Yeah, it was insane.
That's amazing.
And it's amazing. Yeah. And so God was just providing in crazy ways. So it was really very clear this was the road we were supposed to be on. And then when the adoption didn't work out, our adoption account was down to $50, you know? So after all was said and done, we had ended up spending about $14,500 on the adoption that didn't go through. So when we were matched with Sunny and she was born, obviously we had to pay for another adoption. And we got a grant and, you know, some other things. And I think I'd done a couple of other fundraisers in the meantime. And one day someone called me and said, hey, my friend with Young Living is doing a fundraiser and they want to fund an adoption in a day and they want to talk to you. And so we were like, okay. So, because we couldn't finalize until we finished paying the attorney, which obviously is very reasonable. So, but we had a big chunk left. So they talked to us and said, well, you know what? We're choosing you. You guys are going to be our family and we're going to fund this adoption in a day. And when all was said and done, after they, you know, raised the funds and donated a portion of every package they sold or whatever, they ended up cutting us a check for $14,500.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yep. That's so cool.
Look at that.
Yeah, so cool. So God really just like, you know, turned it all around, worked it all out, and we got this beautiful, perfect, amazing little girl.
That's so. And she just fits your family so well.
She does.
She's a doll.
She does.
Let me ask you about, you know, going through something like this is taxing on a marriage. And I would say that that's something that it's just hard. I mean, when you go through something like that, it's just, there's no way around. It's hard. And is that something that you feel drew you guys nearer to each other? Or was it something that you felt was a time that you look back on, you're like, gosh, we got through that. Can't believe it.
Both.
Okay.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think when when the adoption that didn't go through, when all that happened, I think Jimbo was looking at me like, I have no idea how to help you.
Yeah.
Because I just, like I said, I've always been, I'm the oldest of 4 with tough family trauma. And I've always been the one who's like, I'm going to pick us all up and we're going to figure it out. And we're going to
The
move
Louisa.
past. Yeah. Yep. And after this, I was just broken. And I didn't know how to not be broken for a little while.
Yeah.
And I remember just the way Jimbo was looking at me like, I don't know how to help her. Like, she's just so hurt. And I felt like in that moment, the first moments, the only thing that was going to fix it is that I wanted a baby.
Right.
And that was something that Jimbo couldn't do for me, and so, yeah, it was very, very hard. And also, at this time, we'd already been married for 10 years. So we had a lot of time together. And that was like, I look back on that now, and it really, while I wouldn't have chosen that road because it was a hard and long one, we got so much time together, just the 2 of us.
Mm-hmm.
And like, it was amazing. It was such a blessing. So once I really could like see out of the fog and see clearly again, I knew that like focusing on our marriage was going to be what I had to do. And then, yes, then we really clung to each other and we knew, well, it might just be us, and that's great. It would be fine. It would be fine because we are so thankful to have each other.
Yeah. And if that's the case, you definitely want to be investing in each other,
exactly.
and in the marriage, which is what, even if you do get placed with children, investing, we know that investing in our marriages is always the best gift we can give to our children.
For sure.
So yeah, it is so important to do that.
Yeah. And I think that having been married for 10 years before Sunny came along, it helped us to already have those habits in place. So going on date nights and taking trips by just the 2 of us has never been a problem for us. Because that was the norm before she was born. It was just the 2 of us for a very long time. So yeah.
Yes.
So important. So what would you say to a family who is just about to jump into this journey? They want to be adoptive parents. How would you encourage them, or what piece of advice would you give them?
Oh my gosh, that's such a hard question. Not like I haven't done that. Every time, somebody that I know is going through, they always reach out to me, and I love being able to sit down with hopeful families. But I would just say that to keep the lines of communication open with your spouse. And remember that you guys are the glue that's going to hold the rest of your lives together. I mean, obviously having a relationship with the Lord is number 1, but like in this journey, you have to be shoulder to shoulder, because it's just a lot. It's a lot. And knowing that it's a lot, it's so hard, right? Because you cannot prepare anyone from what you have no idea. Because especially for you guys, because your first one was very different than what happened the second time around. So, and there's not really a way to prepare for that, but just knowing it can be a lot. It can be really hard. And remembering to, put the Lord first and be shoulder to shoulder with your spouse, keep the lines of communication open, and just know it's a journey.
Yeah. And it's not for the faint of heart. Like the thing that I just want to say, like to those who are jumping into it, to piggyback on what you're saying, is that it's not easy. Like take off those rose-colored glasses like right away, because you don't want to go in thinking like, oh yeah, you're going to apply and then you see and then you match, bring a baby, woohoo. Right. Like it's not that simple. As much as that is what happens, it's not. There's so much more. It is so complex and layered that I think that is such good advice to say, just go in knowing that it's not going to be like a Hallmark movie, or it's not going to be like your friend who adopted. It's going to be different because your story will be different. Yeah, your journey will be different. 100%. So, yeah, 100%. And you're right. If you don't have an open communication about how you're feeling, what's next, the expectations from your spouse, it will be a very long journey. It will be very difficult. Yeah. So such good advice. Sure. Such good advice. And thank you for sharing your story. That is, can be vulnerable and can be hard to kind of relive that, but I appreciate you because I know that's going to encourage somebody.
For sure. So one more thing that I wanted to say. Sorry.
Yeah, please. No, please. I'd love to hear it.
because I've listened to your podcast a lot of times. And I think one thing that's different about our story is that our birth mom wanted a closed adoption. So
It is different. Yeah.
It is very different. So we have always had a closed adoption because that was what she chose. And so, we haven't had the
Right.
opportunity to have the experiences that families with an open adoption has. So yeah, it's been
That's difficult.
it's been
too.
interesting. It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. And actually now, as time has gone on, we've been able to make connections with some of the family members,
Okay.
but yeah, it was definitely a different kind of an experience than because now most adoptions, they really encourage them to be open or semi-open.
Right.
So we kind of assumed that's what we were going to end up with, And so when our lawyer told us that she wanted it to stay closed, then we were like, okay, well, it's going to be different than what we
what you
thought.
expected.
So, yeah.
Yes,
And
I feel like we need to have a whole episode on that because I know that there are so many adoptive families out there that have closed adoptions. And so I would love to even just like really deep dive into that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Because that is different. And like, what does that mean? Does that mean it has to stay closed, or who can open it? Who's in charge of, like that is a whole thing. Yeah. And all the feelings that go along with that. Yeah, that is different. So at the Funding Love podcast, before we completely wrap the episode, because we are the Funding Love podcast, we like to end it with a little bit of extra love. So what is one thing that you are loving in your life right now?
Oh, that's a great question.
Isn't that fun?
Yes. I am loving our lifestyle. My husband works from home. Yes. I homeschool. And so our days are so flexible. So like yesterday, we could take my husband out to lunch for his birthday. And then we still were able to do all the responsibilities that we had for the day. So I've just been really grateful lately for our lifestyle that Dad is there, Mom is here, Sunny is here.
You're together.
And we can just all be together.
Yeah.
I'm so thankful. So thankful.
That is something to be thankful for.
It really is a blessing. It is.
It is.
Mal, you can agree with that.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I really can too. My husband has always feel like going here and there, bebopping everywhere. But
yeah.
I mean, that is a blessing. And I love that you recognize that and are loving that. And I just got to say, as we're having this conversation right now, we're all on Zoom. For our listeners can't see this, but there's a huge picture of Jimbo behind you.
There
I keep getting distracted. I was like, is that like artwork? What is this on the wall?
It is. Yes. Actually, so he's a surfer.
Okay.
And a few years ago, a local artist who's a photographer did a series of the local surfers, and he had like an art exhibit, and he just took pictures of them, right after they got out of the water, water spots and all.
Yeah.
So you can't see it. It's a really cool picture, but yeah, he doesn't have a shirt on. But the Jacksonville Beach Pier is behind him, and he had just gotten out of the water. But it was a really cool series. I mean, you can see every freckle, every water droplet.
Wow. Cool.
So, yeah, it's really cool. But it is funny because I did a podcast with Tim and Alston for the Travelmation podcast.
Yeah.
And they were also like, what in the world? I was like, yeah, sorry. I always forget it's there.
Don't ever take it down. I think it's great. It's a conversation piece.
For sure.
It's like Jimbo's here with us. We're great.
I know.
Love it.
Oh gosh.
Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank y'all so much for having me. It was great to be able to chat about all this stuff.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's been a joy, and we hope to see you soon. I think we'll see you next month at the at our husband's work event. Your work event, our husband's work event. So we're looking forward to that. And once again, thank you for joining us on this podcast, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in to this episode of the Funding Love podcast. We'll see y'all next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Funding Love podcast. We are a crowd-funded nonprofit, which means that people like you can help make a lasting impact in the lives of adoptive families and birth moms. At Funding Love, we create post-adoption experiences that strengthen bonds, build community, and restore people. And when you partner with us, whether that is giving online, signing up to become a monthly donor, or simply buying merchandise from our shop, you are funding love.